The last light of day was a thin, golden line bleeding out along the western horizon, like a candle finally guttering in its holder. It was that time of evening when the world holds its breath, a quiet pause between the bustle of afternoon and the deep stillness of night. On a winding road that curled through the foothills like a sleeping serpent, a lone figure walked. His name was Elian, and he was a bookbinder by trade. Not the kind who worked in a dusty shop in a crowded city, binding new books with stiff covers and sharp, clean pages. Elian was a mender of old things. He journeyed from town to town, carrying a satchel filled with linen thread, bone folders, pots of fragrant paste, and scraps of aged leather. He was summoned by librarians with shelves of ailing tomes, by historians with crumbling journals, and by ordinary people who had one precious, battered book, a grandmother's recipe collection, a great-grandfather's war diary, that they wanted to see survive another generation. Tonight, the road was his companion. It was a good road, old and wise. Its surface was packed earth and smooth, worn stones, easy on the feet. It had seen centuries of travelers, merchants with their mule trains, pilgrims with their songs, families seeking new lives. Elian felt their echoes in the quiet. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and the sweet, decaying perfume of fallen leaves. An owl called somewhere in the dark woods to his left, a soft, questioning hoot. Who, it seemed to ask. Elian smiled to himself. He knew who he was. He was a man on his way to the village of Stillwater. He had never been to Stillwater, but he had heard tales. They said it was a place that existed slightly out of time, nestled in a valley where the mist lingered late into the morning, and the stream that ran through it was so clear and slow you could watch the thoughts of the fish drifting by. The people there, it was said, were keepers of stories. They didn't just tell them, they lived with them. A farmer might know the ballad of the field he plowed. A baker's bread might be shaped by the legend of the girl who first milled the grain. And in the center of the village was a small, round library built of river stone that held books that were said to hum faintly when you touched them. A letter had found him a fortnight ago, carried by a peddler who knew a tinker, who knew a weaver who was a cousin of the postmaster in a town 3 valleys over. The letter was written on thick, creamy paper in a precise, elegant hand. It was from the curator of Stillwater. A book was ailing, a very special book. Could he come? Elian always answered such calls. He saw himself as a doctor, and each book was a patient. Some had broken spines like an old man with a weary back. Others had loose pages like a child with a loose tooth. Some were simply tired, their leather covers dry and cracked from too many suns and too many winters. His job was to listen to their ailments and give them a little more time. The road began to climb, gently at first, then with more purpose. The trees on either side grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead to form a dark, living tunnel. The last of the golden light vanished, and the world was plunged into the soft, deep blue of twilight. Elian stopped for a moment and lit the small lantern he carried, its flame a tiny, brave star in the encroaching dark. The light pushed back the shadows just enough to see the path directly in front of him. As he walked, the sounds of the forest began their nightly chorus, the rustle of a small creature in the undergrowth, the creak of a great old oak settling its weight. And then a new sound, a soft, rhythmic murmur. He paused, listening. It was the sound of water, not the roar of a rapid, but the gentle, soothing chuckle of a stream running over smooth stones. He had reached the top of the rise. Before him, the land opened up into a wide, shallow bowl of a valley. And there, tucked in the crease of the valley floor, was a cluster of warm, flickering lights, Stillwater. It looked like a handful of fallen stars had been gathered up and placed there for safekeeping. A thin ribbon of silver, the stream itself, wound its way towards the village, reflecting the emerging stars above. The path descended now, leading him down towards those lights. The air changed as he descended. It grew softer, warmer, carrying with it a faint, friendly smell of wood smoke. The sound of the stream grew louder, a constant, comforting companion. Elian felt a deep sense of peace settle over him, as if the valley itself was a great cupped hand, sheltering all within it. He crossed a small, ancient stone bridge. The stream beneath it was exactly as described, impossibly clear, moving so slowly you could indeed see the dark shapes of sleeping trout hovering in the current, barely moving a fin. On the other side of the bridge, the road became the village's main street. The houses were built of the same river stone and dark, age-weathered timber. They stood close together, as if for comfort, their thatched roofs like thick, furry eyebrows over their small, shuttered windows. From behind one of those shutters, a sliver of warm light escaped, and with it the faint sound of a wooden flute, playing a simple lullaby-like tune. Elian walked slowly, his boots making soft, scuffing sounds on the worn cobblestones. He passed the bakers, the weavers, the little inn with its signboard swinging gently in the breeze, though there was no breeze to speak of. The sign showed a sleeping fox curled up under a crescent moon. The sleeping fox. That must be his lodging for the night. But he didn't go in, not yet. His eyes were drawn further down the street, to where the stream made a wide, slow bend. There, nestled in the bend of the stream, sat the library. It was round, just as the letter had said, built of smooth gray river stones that glittered faintly with mica in the starlight. Its door was a dark, solid oak, and its windows were small, round portholes that glowed with a soft, gentle light from within. It looked less like a building and more like a great, wise creature that had settled down by the water long ago and decided to stay. Elian stood for a long time, just looking at it. He felt a pull towards it, a quiet invitation. But he was tired, and the curator would not be expecting him until morning. With a final, lingering glance, he turned back towards the inn. The door to the sleeping fox opened with a friendly creak. The common room was warm and low-ceilinged, with heavy black beams crossed with age. A fire crackled merrily on a great stone hearth, and the air smelled of stewed herbs, baking bread, and contentment. A few of the villagers' residents sat quietly, an old man carving a piece of wood, a young woman reading by the firelight, a pair of old friends playing a game of stones in the corner. They all looked up as he entered, and they all smiled. Not the sharp, curious smile of strangers, but the slow, welcoming smile of people who had all the time in the world. The innkeeper, a round woman with flour on her apron and eyes that crinkled with warmth, greeted him without a word, simply pointing to a chair by the fire and placing a bowl of thick, savory stew and a hunk of crusty bread before him. Elian ate slowly, letting the warmth seep into his bones. He listened to the low murmur of the villagers' voices, the crackle of the fire, the soft ticking of a tall case clock in the corner. The sound of the wooden flute had stopped. Now there was only this, a perfect quiet bubble of peace. After his meal, the innkeeper led him up a narrow, creaking staircase to a small room under the eaves. It was simple, a bed piled high with quilts, a washstand with a blue ceramic bowl, a small window that looked out over the village green towards the stream. The sheets smelled of lavender. When he blew out his candle and lay back on the soft pillow, the last thing he saw through the window was the round, glowing shape of the library, still humming its silent, welcoming light into the night. He could just hear the stream, a whisper over the stones, and in that space between wakefulness, Elian woke to a world painted in shades of pearl and silver. The small window in his gabled room was a misted glass, and through it the light that entered was soft and diffused, as if the sun itself had decided to sleep in. He lay still for a moment, cocooned in the lavender-scented quilts, listening. There was no sound of bird song, no clatter of carts, no raised voices. There was only the gentle, persistent murmur of the stream, and a new sound, the soft, almost inaudible patter of a fine mist against the window pane. It wasn't quite rain, but something softer, a deep, settling dampness that made the whole world feel hushed and intimate. He dressed slowly, taking his time. There was no hurry in Stillwater. He could feel it in the very air. Downstairs, the common room of the sleeping fox was warm and smelled of honey and baking oats. The innkeeper, whose name he now learned was Marta, set a bowl of porridge before him, so thick and creamy a spoon could stand upright in it, and drizzled it with golden honey from a pottery jar. "The mist will lift by midday," she said, her voice a comfortable rumble. "It always does. But till then, the village likes to keep its secrets." She smiled, a knowing, gentle smile, and left him to his breakfast. After he had eaten, Elian stepped outside. The mist was indeed thick, wrapping the cottages in soft gray wool. The cobblestones were slick and dark, and the air tasted of water and cool stone. He pulled his coat a little tighter and walked towards the stream, his breath misting gently before him. The round library looked even more otherworldly in this light, its gray stones seeming to absorb the mist and glow with a soft inner luminescence. It was as if the building itself was breathing the fog in and out. He crossed the small wooden footbridge that led to the library's door. Up close, the oak door was even more impressive. It was carved with a design so old it was almost worn away. He could just make out the shapes of flowing water, of leaves, of open books whose pages seemed to turn into birds. He lifted the iron ring that served as a knocker and let it fall. The sound was soft, but the door swung open almost immediately, as if someone had been waiting just on the other side. A woman stood there, tall and slender, with hair the color of the silver-gray mist and eyes the clear, pale blue of a winter sky. She wore a simple dress of dark wool, and around her neck hung a small, intricate key on a leather cord. This was surely the curator. "Elian, the bookbinder," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was low and musical, like the stream itself. "I am Alara. Welcome to Stillwater. The book has been waiting for you." She stepped aside, and he entered the library. The warmth that enveloped him was not just from a fire, but a dry, comfortable warmth that was kind to paper and leather. The air smelled of old books, that unique, wonderful perfume of aged paper, binding glue, and leather, and the faint, sweet ghost of pressed flowers left between pages decades ago. The library was one single circular room, its walls lined from floor to high vaulted ceiling with bookshelves. A spiral staircase of wrought iron led to a narrow gallery that ran the entire circumference of the room, giving access to the highest shelves. In the center of the floor stood a large round table, and on it, under the soft glow of a green-shaded lamp, lay a single book. But it was more than just a room full of books. Elian felt it immediately. There was a presence here, a quiet hum of life. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, but one you felt in your chest. A gentle vibration, like the purring of a very large, very contented cat. This was the hum he had heard about. The books weren't just objects, they were repositories of lived experience. Alara led him to the table. The book lay open, its pages carefully supported by cushions stuffed with lamb's wool. Elian had surrounded himself with his tools, but also with new things Alara had brought him from her own stores. Sheets of soft blotting paper, small weights wrapped in velvet, a tiny brush made of squirrel hair for applying paste in the most delicate places, and a magnifying glass on a brass stand, which allowed him to study the fibers of the paper as if they were a landscape. He was learning to read the book in a way that had nothing to do with words. Every bookbinder knew that paper had memory. A crease remembered being folded, a tear remembered the moment of violence that caused it, a stain remembered the cup of tea that had been set down carelessly, or the tear that had fallen from a reader's eye. But this was different. This paper remembered with intention. It held on to sensations, the cold of rain, the panic of being lost, the desperate hope for shelter, and it refused to let them go. The page that had drawn him here, the one that remembered the great storm, was the most afflicted. But as Elian worked, he began to sense that its sickness had spread, like a chill moving through a body. Neighboring pages had grown cool to the touch. A few had developed a faint dampness that no amount of dry air could remedy. They were catching the sadness, the way one sleeper's restless dreams can infect another in the same room. He needed to understand Lyra. On the fourth morning, Alara brought him something she had found in the library's archives, a small leather journal, its cover plain and unadorned. This was hers, Alara said softly, setting it beside his elbow. Her personal notebook, the things she gathered, the herbs she dried, the clouds she watched. She kept it for years after the storm. Perhaps it will help you understand. Elian thanked her with a look. He didn't open it immediately. He had learned that old things needed to be approached with respect, given time to introduce themselves. So he finished the task he had begun, the careful insertion of a fresh blotting paper between two pages that had grown too close, their memories mingling like uncomfortable dreams. Then he washed his hands thoroughly, dried them on a clean linen cloth, and only then did he pick up Lyra's journal. The leather was warm beneath his fingers, not with the heat of the storm page, but the gentle warmth of something that had been held often, carried in pockets, touched by hands that loved it. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with a tidy, practical script, the handwriting of someone who spent time alone and had developed a conversation with herself. "Third day of autumn rain," one entry began. "The moss on the north slope is ready. It must be gathered when wet, dried slowly and kept in dark glass. Old Mara says it brings dreams of flying if steeped in honey water. I have not tried this. I am afraid I might not want to wake up." Elian smiled. He could feel her voice across the centuries, curious, brave, a little lonely. He turned more pages. There were drawings of leaves, pressed flowers, notes on the habits of birds. Lyra had watched everything. She had noted the day the first blackberry ripened, the hour the swallows left for the south, the way the light fell on the western hill in December. She had loved this valley with an attention so complete that it had become a kind of prayer. And then, toward the back of the journal, the entries changed. The handwriting became less tidy, more urgent. The words were written quickly, as if she feared she might forget them before they could be set down. The dates placed her in her 23rd year, the year of the great storm. "The sky was green this morning," one entry read. "I have seen this only twice before, and both times the weather turned violent by evening. But the moss on the high ridge will be perfect today, and if I wait, the season will pass. I will go early. I will be home before the wind rises." The next page was smudged, as if damp fingers had turned it. The ink was lighter here,
the words harder to read. The wind tore the sound from my mouth. The hill had no shelter. I know this hill, every rock, every tree, and yet I found nothing. The cold is a living thing. It has teeth. It has hands that reach inside you. Elian stopped reading. He could feel it again, the chill radiating from the codex only a few feet away. Lyra's terror was not just in her journal. It was trapped in the book she had written in afterward, the official memory of the valley, the place where she had tried to put her experience into words that would last. But she had put more than words. She had put the feeling itself. He set the journal down gently and turned back to the codex. Now he understood the task before him. He could not simply dry the page. He could not simply mend the tears. He had to help Lyra finish her journey home. The page was stuck in the storm, on that hillside, in that freezing rain. It had never reached the part where she found her way back, where she stumbled through the door of her cottage, where Marta's great-great-great-grandmother had wrapped her in blankets and fed her hot soup until she stopped shivering. That part was in the journal, but not in the codex. Lyra had never written it. Perhaps she was too tired. Perhaps she thought the survival was less important than the terror. But the terror lingered untethered, and now it needed the rest of the story to set it free. Elian worked through the afternoon with a new purpose. He did not try to flatten the page. Instead, he treated it as a storyteller treats a listener who has only heard the sad parts. He told it, silently, with every careful touch, the rest of the tale.
The round library had its own relationship with time. Elian discovered this as the days began to blur, not into confusion, but into a gentle rhythm that had nothing to do with clocks or schedules. There was the quality of light through the porthole windows, morning gold, afternoon silver, evening amber. There was the sound of the stream, which seemed to change its song depending on the angle of the sun. And there was the book itself, which breathed beneath his hands like a living thing. He had been in Stillwater for 3 days now, though it felt both longer and shorter. Longer because he had fallen into a depth of concentration he had not experienced in years. Shorter because each time he looked up from his work, the light had shifted, and hours had vanished like mist. The Codex of the Valley lay open on the round table, its pages supported by cushions stuffed with lamb's wool. Elian had surrounded himself with his tools, but also with new things, things Ilara had brought him from her own stores. Sheets of soft blotting paper, small weights wrapped in velvet, a tiny brush made of squirrel hair for applying paste in the most delicate places, and a magnifying glass on a brass stand, which allowed him to study the fibers of the paper as if they were a landscape. He was learning to read the book in a way that had nothing to do with words. Every bookbinder knew that paper had memory. A crease remembered being folded. A tear remembered the moment of violence that caused it. A stain remembered the cup of tea that had been set down carelessly, or the tear that had fallen from a reader's eye. But this was different. This paper remembered with intention. It held on to sensations, the cold of rain, the panic of being lost, the desperate hope for shelter, and refused to let them go. The page that had drawn him here, the one that remembered the great storm, was the most afflicted. But as Elian worked, he began to sense that its sickness had spread, like a chill moving through a body. Neighboring pages had grown cool to the touch. A few had developed a faint dampness that no amount of dry air could remedy. They were catching the sadness, the way one sleeper's restless dreams can infect another in the same room. He needed to understand Lyra. On the fourth morning, Ilara brought him something she had found in the library's archives, a small leather journal separate from the codex, its cover plain and unadorned. "This was hers," Ilara said softly, setting it beside his elbow. Her personal notebook, the things she gathered, the herbs she dried, the clouds she watched. She kept it for years after the storm. Perhaps it will help you understand. Elian thanked her with a look. He didn't open it immediately. He had learned that old things needed to be approached with respect, given time to introduce themselves. Instead, he finished the task he had begun, the careful insertion of a fresh blotting paper between two pages that had grown too close, their memories mingling like uncomfortable dreams. Then he washed his hands thoroughly, dried them on a clean linen cloth, and only then did he pick up Lyra's journal. The leather was warm beneath his fingers, not with the heat of the storm page, but with the gentle warmth of something that had been held often, carried in pockets, touched by hands that loved it. He opened it carefully. The pages were filled with a tidy, practical script, the handwriting of someone who spent time alone and had developed a conversation with herself. "Third day of autumn rain," one entry began. "The moss on the north slope is ready. It must be gathered when wet, dried slowly, and kept in dark glass. Old Mara says it brings dreams of flying if steeped in honey water. I have not tried this. I'm afraid I might not want to wake up." Elian smiled. He could feel her voice across the centuries, curious, brave, a little lonely. He turned more pages. There were drawings of leaves, pressed flowers, notes on the habits of birds. Lyra had watched everything. She had noted the day the first blackberry ripened, the hour the swallows left for the south, the way the light fell on the western hill in December. She had loved this valley with an attention so complete that it had become a kind of prayer. And then, toward the back of the journal, the entries changed. The handwriting became less tidy, more urgent. The words were written quickly, as if she feared she might forget them before they could be set down. The dates placed her in her 23rd year, the year of the great storm. "The sky was green this morning," one entry read. "I have seen this only twice before, and both times the weather turned violent by evening. But the moss on the high ridge will be perfect today, and if I wait, the season will pass. I will go early. I will be home before the wind rises." The next page was smudged, as if damp fingers had turned it. The ink was lighter here, the words harder to read. "I misjudged. The wind rose faster than any I have known. The path I have walked since childhood disappeared in the rain. The hill had no shelter. I know this hill, every rock, every tree, and yet I found nothing. The cold is a living thing. It has teeth. It has hands that reach inside you." Elian stopped reading. He could feel it again, the chill radiating from the codex, only a few feet away. Lyra's terror was not just in her journal. It was trapped in the book she had written afterward, the official memory of the valley, the place where she had tried to put her experience into words that would last. But she had put more than words in. She had put the feeling itself.
He set the journal down gently and turned back to the codex. Now he understood the task before him. He could not simply dry the page. He could not simply mend the tears. He had to help Lyra finish her journey home. The page was stuck in the storm, on that hillside, in that freezing rain. It had never reached the part where she found her way back, where she stumbled through the door of her cottage, where Marta's great-great-grandmother had wrapped her in blankets and fed her hot soup until she stopped shivering. That part was in the journal, but not in the codex. Lyra had never written it. Perhaps she had been too tired. Perhaps she thought the survival was less important than the terror. But the terror had lingered, untethered, and now it needed the rest of the story to set it free. Elian worked through the afternoon with a new purpose. He did not try to flatten the page. Instead, he treated it as a storyteller treats a listener who has only heard the sad parts. He told it silently, with every careful touch, the rest of the tale. He let his fingers rest on the rippled paper and imagined the moment Lyra saw the light of her cottage through the rain. He imagined her hand finding the latch, the door swinging open, the warmth rushing out to meet her, the steam rising from her wet clothes, the taste of the soup, the feeling of the blanket around her shoulders, the fire crackling as if to say, "You are home, you are safe, the storm cannot reach you here." The page did not change visibly, but Elian felt something shift beneath his hands, a slight lessening of tension, a faint warmth, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. He worked until the light through the porthole windows turned the color of honey, then amber, then a deep velvety purple. Ilara came in quietly and lit the lamps for him, one by one, their soft glow pushing the shadows back into the corners of the round room. She did not speak. She simply left a small tray with bread and cheese and a cup of something warm.
The days in Stillwater had begun to weave themselves into a pattern that felt less like routine and more like the slow, steady breathing of the valley itself. Elian would wake in his small room under the eaves, the lavender scent of his sheets faded now, but still present, like a ghost of comfort. He would dress slowly, listening to the sounds of the village coming to life, the clank of a bucket at the well, the soft lowing of cattle being led to pasture, the distant thump of the baker's oven door. Then downstairs to Marta's common room, where breakfast awaited him with the dependable warmth of a habit he wished he could keep forever. The porridge was always the same, yet always different, sometimes with honey, sometimes with preserved berries that tasted of summer captured in glass, sometimes with a sprinkle of nuts that Marta had cracked herself, their fragrance still clinging to her fingers. Elian had stopped trying to pay her. She would simply smile and shake her head and refill his cup with tea until he had drunk his fill, and then she would shoo him out the door with a wave of her flour-dusted hand. The walk to the library had become a meditation. He knew every stone on the path now, every twist in the stream's course, every moss-covered root that reached across his way. The wooden footbridge creaked in the same place each morning, a friendly greeting. The round library's oak door, with its ancient carvings of water and leaves and books that turned into birds, opened at his touch as if it had been waiting just for him. And inside, the codex waited. Each day, Elian grew more attuned to its needs. He had learned to read its moods the way a sailor reads the sky. Some mornings the book felt peaceful, its pages relaxed, its ancient hum a contented purr. Other mornings there was a tightness in the spine, a reluctance in the paper, as if it had spent the night wrestling with old dreams. On those days, he would simply sit with it for an hour before beginning his work, his hands resting lightly on its cover, letting it feel his presence, his patience, his unwavering intention to help. The page that remembered the rain was improving. The rippling had softened, the chill had diminished, but Elian knew it was not yet healed. It still held on to something, not the terror now, but something else. A loneliness, perhaps, a sense of being misunderstood. Lyra's fear had been addressed, but Lyra's isolation remained. On the 7th morning, Ilara found him staring at the page with a furrowed brow. "You're troubled," she said. It was not a question. She had a way of stating things that made them feel like observations rather than intrusions, as if she were simply noting the weather. Elian nodded slowly. "She's letting go of the fear," he said, speaking of the page as if it were Lyra herself, which in a way it was. But something remains, a sadness, a sense of being alone in the memory, as if she survived the storm but never found her way back to the village. Not really. Ilara was silent for a long moment. Then she moved to a shelf near the back of the library and ran her fingers along the spines until she found what she was looking for. It was a small book, newer than the codex but still old, its leather cover worn smooth by many hands. "This is the record of the village healer," she said, bringing it to the table. "From 100 years ago, Marta's great-great-grandmother, the one who tended Lyra after the storm. Her name was Bryn." She opened the book to a page marked by a ribbon of faded silk. The handwriting was different from Lyra's, firmer, more practical, the script of someone who had no time for flourishes, but the words were clear. "The girl Lyra was brought to me half-drowned and cold as winter stone," Elian read. "I have seen many brought in from the hills, but none so deep in the chill as she. The body can be warmed with fires and blankets and broth, but the spirit takes longer. She spoke little for many days. She would startle at the sound of rain on the roof. She would not go near the stream. I kept her in the small room off the kitchen, where the fire never goes out. I fed her soups made with the warming herbs, ginger, cinnamon, the bark of the wild cherry. I wrapped her in blankets that had been warmed on the hearth, and I talked to her. Not about the storm, but about ordinary things, the price of wool at market, the antics of the baker's cat, the way the light fell on the western hill in December, which she had always loved. Slowly she came back, not all at once, but in pieces, a smile at something the cat did, a question about the herbs I was drying, a willingness to step outside just for a moment and feel the sun on her face. By spring she was helping me gather moss again. She never spoke of the storm. I did not ask. Some things need to be left in their own time." Elian read the passage twice, then a third time. He could feel something shifting in his understanding. Bryn hadn't tried to fix Lyra. She hadn't pushed her to talk about the trauma or work it through with words. She had simply provided warmth, steady, patient, unquestioning warmth, and let Lyra find her own way back. That was what the page needed. Not more words, not more stories, just warmth. Sustained, patient, unquestioning warmth. He looked up at Ilara. "The small room off the kitchen," he said. "The one where the fire never goes out. Does it still exist?" Ilara's eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. "It does. Marta's kitchen is in the same house Bryn lived in. The house has been added to over the years, made into the inn, but that part, the oldest part, is still there. Marta uses it for storage now, but the hearth is still intact." Elian stood, his heart quickening with a purpose he could not fully explain. "Can we see it?" Marta was kneading bread when they found her in the inn's kitchen, her strong hands working the dough with the practiced rhythm of a lifetime. She listened to Elian's request without stopping her work, her expression thoughtful.
"The old room," she said when he had finished. "Yes, it's still there. I don't go in much, it's cold, and the chimney doesn't draw as well as it should, but the hearth is good, solid stone. Bryn built it herself, they say." She wiped her hands on her apron and reached for a ring of keys hanging by the door. "Come, I'll show you." She led them through the kitchen, past the great black stove and the racks of drying herbs, to a narrow door that Elian had never noticed. It was low and set deep into the stone wall, its wood dark with age. She selected a key from the ring, fitted it into the lock, and pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and dim, lit only by the light that filtered through a single tiny window high in the wall. It was used for storage, as Marta had said, old chairs piled in a corner, boxes of candles, rolls of fabric wrapped in muslin. But even through the dust and disuse, Elian could feel it, the warmth. Not physical warmth, the room was cold, colder than the kitchen, but something deeper, a memory of warmth embedded in the very stones. He stepped inside and ran his hand along the wall beside the hearth. The stones were rough, uneven, fitted together by hands that cared about more than just function. He could feel the centuries of fires that had burned here, the countless nights when someone had sat in this room, wrapped in blankets, slowly coming back to themselves. "This is it," he said softly. "This is where she healed." Ilara stood in the doorway, watching him. Marta had returned to her bread, leaving them alone. The silence in the small room was different from the silence outside, deeper, older, more intimate. Elian closed his eyes and tried to imagine it, the fire crackling on this hearth, Bryn moving quietly, adding herbs to a pot, adjusting blankets, saying nothing important, but saying it with such steady presence that it became everything. Lyra sitting where he was standing now, wrapped in warmth, listening to the ordinary sounds of a life continuing around her, slowly remembering that she was part of it. He opened his eyes. "I need to bring the page here." Ilara's eyes rose slightly, then softened with understanding. "Bring it here? From the library?" "The page remembers the rain," Elian said. "It remembers the cold, the fear, the isolation, but it has never experienced the other side of that night. It has never known the warmth of this room, the patience of Bryn's care, the slow return to ordinary life. It needs to feel what Lyra felt after the storm, not just during it." Ilara considered this for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "The codex has never left the library, not in all its years, but perhaps it's time. Perhaps that's what it's been waiting for." It took them the rest of the morning to prepare. Ilara found a carrying box lined with soft wool, designed long ago for transporting delicate manuscripts. Elian lined it further with layers of silk and cotton, creating a nest that would cushion the book against any movement. Then, with the reverence of a ritual, they approached the codex. The book seemed to know something was different. Its hum had changed, more alert, more questioning.
The morning after the fire in the small stone room, Elian woke with a feeling he could not name. It was not quite satisfaction, though his work on the storm page had brought a deep sense of rightness. It was not quite anticipation, though he knew there was more to be done. It was something softer, something that lingered at the edges of his consciousness like the mist that still sometimes wrapped the valley in its gray embrace. He lay in his bed under the eaves, watching the light through the small window shift from gray to pale gold as the sun climbed over the hills. The stream sang its endless song. Somewhere a rooster crowed, though the sound was distant, muffled by the thatch and stone, more a suggestion than an interruption. He thought about the codex. The storm page was better, he was certain of it. The chill had lifted, the rippling had softened, and when he had returned the book to its place in the library last night, the hum of the room had welcomed it with a warmth that had not been there before. But a book like the Codex did not exist in isolation. Its pages were connected, its stories intertwined. Healing one page meant understanding how it connected to all the others. He dressed slowly and went downstairs. Marta was not in the kitchen, but a plate of bread and honey waited for him by the fire, a cup of tea steaming beside it. He ate alone, listening to the comfortable sounds of the inn, the creak of floorboards upstairs, the distant clatter of pots, the soft murmur of voices outside the street. The walk to the library felt different today, lighter. The stream seemed to sparkle more than usual, the morning light catching the ripples and scattering them into tiny rainbows. The wooden footbridge creaked its familiar greeting, and the round library's oak door opened at his touch as if it had been waiting patiently all night. Inside, the air was warm and still. The green-shaded lamp on the round table was not lit. Ilara was not here yet, but enough light came through the porthole windows to fill the room with a soft golden glow. The Codex lay where he had left it, closed now, its ancient leather cover catching the light. He approached it slowly, as one approaches a sleeping friend. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he placed his hands on the cover and simply listened. The hum was different. He had grown so accustomed to the library's constant gentle purr that he had almost stopped noticing it. But now he heard it with new ears. The note had changed. It was deeper, richer, more complex. The storm page had been a discordant tone in the great harmony of the book, and now that tone had softened, blended, found its place in the chord. But as he listened more carefully, he began to hear something else, a whisper, faint, almost imperceptible, coming not from the Codex itself, but from the shelves around him, the other books. They were stirring, responding to the change in their ancient companion. Elian stood very still, letting the feeling wash over him. He had spent his life among books, had mended thousands of them, had held their broken spines and torn pages in his hands with reverence and care, but he had never felt anything quite like this. The books were not just objects here, they were a community. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Ilara enter, her silver-gray hair catching the light. She stopped just inside the doorway, her pale blue eyes moving from his face to the shelves around him. She felt it too. "They know," she said softly. It was not a question. Elian nodded. "They're waiting for something." Ilara moved slowly into the room, her footsteps silent on the stone floor. She ran her hand along the edge of a shelf as she passed, a gesture of greeting, of acknowledgement. "The Codex is the heart of this library," she said, "but it is not the only book with memories. Each of these holds stories. Some are happy, some are sad, some are simply patient, waiting to be read, waiting to be remembered. They have been watching you since you arrived." Elian looked back at the shelves. The whispering had not stopped. If anything, it had grown slightly louder, more insistent. Not words, not exactly, more like the rustle of leaves in a gentle wind, the murmur of a stream over stones, the distant sound of voices in a crowded room where you cannot quite make out what is being said. "What do they want?" he asked. Ilara considered the question for a long moment. Then she said slowly, "I think," she said slowly, "they want to be heard, not all at once, not in a way that would overwhelm you, but one by one. They have seen what you did for the Codex. They know you are a listener, and they have been waiting for a long time for someone who would listen." Elian felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had come to Stillwater to mend one book, but the valley, it seemed, had other plans. He turned back to the Codex and carefully opened it. The storm page lay before him, still rippled but no longer cold, still marked by the rain, but no longer trapped in it. He could read the words now,
where before they had been obscured by the page's distress. The rain fell for 3 days and 3 nights, Lyra had written. I thought I would die on that hill. I thought the valley would forget me. But when I stumbled through my door, half drowned and frozen, Bryn was there. She did not ask questions. She simply wrapped me in blankets and built up the fire and fed me soup until I stopped shaking. And in the days that followed, she did not try to make me talk about it. She simply let me be there in the warm room, watching her work, listening to her talk about ordinary things, the cat, the price of wool, the way the light falls on the western hill in December. And slowly I came back. The storm is part of me now. It always will be, but it is not all of me. Elian read the words twice, then a third time. They were not new. They had been there all along, hidden beneath the page's distress. But now he could see them clearly, and they filled him with a quiet joy. Lyra had written the hope after all. It had simply been waiting, like the page itself, for someone to help it emerge. He looked up at Ilara. She wrote it, he said. The healing, it's here. Ilara came to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. When she finished, she smiled, a slow, warm smile that made her pale eyes crinkle at the corners. She wrote it for herself, she said, not for the village memory, just for herself, a reminder that she survived. Elian nodded. He understood now. The page had not been holding on to the storm. It had been holding on to the moment between the storm and the healing, the moment when Lyra did not yet know she would survive. Bryn's warmth had released that, had allowed the page to finally show what came next. He sat back in his chair and looked around the room again. The whispering had not stopped, but it had changed. It was softer now, less urgent. The books were no longer waiting. They were simply present, aware, acknowledging. "What do I do now?" he asked. Ilara moved to a shelf near the spiral staircase and ran her fingers along the spines. She stopped at a small book bound in pale green leather, its color the exact shade of new leaves in spring. She pulled it gently from the shelf and brought it to the table. "This is the next one," she said. "It has been waiting for you." She placed the book before him. It was smaller than the codex, more modest, its leather cover worn smooth, not by age but by handling. Someone had held this book often, had carried it in pockets, had opened it countless times. The title on the spine was faded almost to nothing, but Elian could just make out a single word: Thorn. He looked at Ilara questioningly. Thorn was the village gardener, she said, not an official title, just what everyone called her. She lived here about 80 years ago. She had a gift for growing things, but more than that, she had a gift for understanding them. She kept this journal for 40 years, recording everything: when to plant, when to harvest, which seeds needed darkness to germinate, which needed light, which needed to hear the stream to wake from their winter sleep. "Which needed to hear the stream?" Elian repeated, intrigued. Ilara smiled. She believed plants could hear, not with ears, of course, but she said they could feel vibration, could sense the presence of water, could distinguish between the sound of running water and the sound of wind in the leaves. She planted her garden accordingly. The vegetables that needed the most moisture were closest to the stream. The flowers that bloomed in drought were farthest away. And in the middle, she planted the things that just needed to know the water was there, even if they couldn't reach it. Elian looked down at the small green book. It seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, different from the codex's ancient hum, but related to it, part of the same great conversation. "What does it need?" he asked. Ilara opened the book carefully. The pages were filled with a neat.
The days that followed folded into one another like the pages of a book being turned by a gentle hand. Elian's routine had settled into something that felt less like habit and more like a conversation with the valley itself. Wake to the lavender-scented quiet of his room, dress slowly, listening to the stream's endless song, descend to Marta's kitchen for porridge and honey and tea that tasted of herbs he could not name, walk the familiar path to the round library, greeting the wooden footbridge with its friendly creak, the stream with its sparkling light, the ancient oak door with its carvings of water and leaves and books that turned into birds, and then the books. The small green journal of Thorn, the gardener, had become his primary companion. Each day he would take it from its place on the shelf and carry it to the round table, where the green shaded lamp cast its soft glow over the pages. He would open it to the place where Thorn's handwriting faltered, where the words became uncertain, where the paper itself seemed to hesitate. He did not try to mend it in any traditional sense. There were no torn pages to repair, no broken spine to reinforce. The book was physically sound. Its ailment was of a different nature, an ailment of the spirit, of intention, of the struggle between what wanted to be said and what could actually be captured in words. Elian had learned in his years as a bookbinder that every book had a voice. Some were loud and confident, demanding to be read. Others were shy, hiding their stories behind dense prose or difficult handwriting. But Thorn's book was different. Its voice was not shy so much as uncertain. It spoke in fragments, in half-sentences, in questions that trailed off into silence. It was the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime listening to the quiet wisdom of plants and never quite learned to translate that wisdom into human language. He spent the first few days simply reading, not trying to fix anything, not reaching for his tools, just reading. He followed Thorn's journey through 40 years of gardens, the triumphs and failures, the experiments that worked and ones that didn't, the slow accumulation of knowledge that could only come from paying attention season after season to the same small patch of ground. The peas planted by the full moon always grow taller, she had written in an early entry. I do not know why. Perhaps they can feel the pull, the way the stream feels the tide, though we are far from the sea. Perhaps they simply like the company of the moon. I like to think so. The carrots that hear the stream from the moment they are seeded develop sweeter flavor, another entry read. I tested this. 20 seeds in the quiet of the cottage garden, 20 seeds by the water's edge. The difference is unmistakable. They know. They know when they are being listened to. Elian found himself smiling at these passages. Thorn had a way of seeing the world that made it feel more alive, more connected, more full of intention. She did not anthropomorphize the plants. She was too practical for that, but she recognized in them a kind of awareness, a response to their environment that went beyond simple cause and effect. As he read deeper into the journal, he began to notice a shift. The entries became shorter, more sporadic. The handwriting, always neat and practical, began to show signs of tremor. And then came the section Ilara had shown him, the last year, where Thorn tried to write about dying. I do not know how to say this, one page began. I have written about peas and carrots and the way the roses respond to the first warm rain of spring. I have written about the soil and the sun and the mysterious language of seeds. But I do not know how to write about this, about the way my hands shake now when I try to hold the trowel, about the mornings when I am too tired to walk to the stream, about the knowing that grows in me, not like a plant reaching for light, but like a root going deeper into darkness. The entry stopped there. The next page was blank. Then another attempt. Bryn once told me that some things need to be left in their own time. She was talking about Lyra, about the storm, about the way healing cannot be rushed. I think about that now. I think about the things I am leaving behind, the garden, the knowledge, the seeds I have saved for 40 years. I want to leave instructions. I want to leave words that will help whoever comes after understand what I have learned. But the words will not come. They get stuck somewhere between my heart and my hand, and all that reaches the page is this. Again, nothing, just the pen trailing off into empty space. Elian sat with these pages for a long time. He could feel Thorne's frustration, her desperation, her fear that everything she had learned would be lost. But beneath that, he could feel something else, a deep, patient acceptance that she herself could not access. The part of her that had spent 40 years watching things grow, watching them die, watching them come back again in their own season. That part of her knew something that her conscious mind could not quite grasp, that nothing is ever truly lost. He thought about the garden. He had seen it walking through the village, a patch of ground behind a small stone cottage near the stream, still cultivated by whoever lived there now. The current gardener was a young woman named Iris that Martin had introduced him to one afternoon. Iris had inherited Thorne's garden along with the cottage, and she tended it with the same quiet attention Thorne had given it for 40 years. She kept notebooks, Iris had told him, showing him the carefully organized shelves in her kitchen. Not just the journal in the library, but practical notebooks, when to plant, how deep, which varieties did best in which part of the garden. I used them every day. She left me everything I needed. Elian remembered this now, sitting with Thorne's unfinished journal. She had left instructions, not in this book, not in the form she had wanted, but in the practical notebooks that Iris used every day. Her knowledge had not been lost. It was growing in the garden even now, manifesting in the height of the peas and the sweetness of the carrots, and the way the roses responded to the first warm rain of spring. The journal was not where her legacy lived. It was where her fear lived. The fear that she would be forgotten, that her life's work would disappear, that the garden would outlast her understanding of it. And that fear had paralyzed her, had made it impossible to write the words she thought she needed to write. But the words were not needed. The garden itself was the message. On the 5th day of working with Thorne's journal, Elian did something he had never done before. He closed the book, tucked it carefully under his arm, and left the library. He walked through the village, past the sleeping fox, past the bakers and the weavers, to the small stone cottage by the stream where Iris was working in the garden. She looked up as he approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was young, perhaps 25, with the same kind of patient attention in her eyes that Elian had imagined in Thorne's. The garden around her was a riot of late autumn color, pumpkins ripening on the vine, late beans climbing their poles, the last of the summer flowers going to seed. "Iris," Elian said, holding up the journal, "I wonder if you might help me with something." She led him to a small bench by the stream, where they sat together as he opened the book to the troubled pages. He explained what he had found, Thorne's struggle to write about dying, her fear that her knowledge would be lost, the words that would not come. Iris listened quietly, her eyes moving over the pages. When Elian finished, she was silent for a long moment, watching the water flow past. "She came here," Iris said finally. "Not to the library, not to her kitchen, but here, to the garden. I was just a girl then, 8 or 9. I used to help her sometimes, weeding, watering things, learning the names of things. She didn't talk much those last months. She would just sit on this bench and watch the stream, watch the plants, watch the light change. I didn't understand it then,
I thought she was sad, but now I think she was saying goodbye, not with words, but with her presence. She was giving the garden one last chance to teach her, and one last chance to teach me. Elian looked at the bench they were sitting on. It was old, worn, smooth by years of use, placed perfectly to catch the afternoon sun and the sound of the stream. Thorn had sat here, watching her life's work grow around her, letting it sink into her one final time. She left you everything, Elian said softly. Iris nodded. Not in words, in the garden itself, in the way the beams are planted, in the position of the